There we go. And then I will hand over to you, Andrea, to get started.
All right. So thank you for having me, everyone. So I am Andrea Shortland, and I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist. And I'm kind of here on behalf of Discoco, who I don't know if Lucy's going to say anything, but so they are fantastic. Yeah. Do you want to say something, Lucy, first, or?
Oh, I can do. I don't have to, but now I'm saying something, can't I? Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everybody. I'm the co-founder with my colleague Isabel and friend Isabel Moen of Discoco, and we curate online courses run by brilliant expert women like Andrea. And we've launched a course. This is our kind of launch event really for our Breakup Bounce Back course. So it's where we've pulled together the experts. Knowledge of a number of women who are within our community, everything from the kind of deeper kind of psychological information that Andrea is going to talk you through, plus it's a little bit extra in the course, all the way through to things like cooking and decluttering in relation to when you break up with somebody. So I think hopefully you'll be get the link afterwards, and we've given everybody who's kind of signed up to furlough a 25% discount for that launch. So yes, that's why I'm here, just kind of saying hi and supporting Andrea, but I'm going to hand back over to her because she's going to be running this session. I really hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. Andrea's fantastic. I'm excited to listen into this as well.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm here on behalf of that, and then I also run a sort of an online psychology thing I started in lockdown called Pocket Family Psychologist. So you may have had that link. We're on social media and whatnot, and that is all about trying to make psychology just more accessible and less grand and locked up in cams or whatever where you can never access it. So yeah, we have a couple of online courses for kids. We're developing some stuff for teenagers, and yeah, we just try and help out with blog posts and whatnot. So just to say that this topic particularly interests me, both personally and professionally. So, I mean, professionally, I work a lot. I work both with children and adults, but we specialise a lot around family work. And I work a lot with sort of 8 years up to adolescents and then adults as well. But we see a lot of children from separated families or blended families. And we also, my colleague is a family therapist, and she does a lot of work with families, particularly where there's blended families. So that's kind of professionally, and I will be sharing some bits and pieces from the therapy room with you today. But also personally, divorce is very close to my heart. So my dad was married 3 times. My mum married twice. There's just so much divorce and separation in my family. So I have several siblings, several half siblings, and 1 full sibling. So yeah, it's kind of lived experience too. So it's something I care about a lot as well. And just to say on the outset, probably I'm going to be listing some or talking to you because I'm a clinical psychologist. Obviously, that means I work with difficulties where things go wrong. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today will be where things go wrong, or the kind of struggles people have, as opposed to all the good stuff, because that's not my business. But just to say, personally, I'm delighted my parents separated. So from it would have been a very different experience had they not have. And I think I really enjoyed a very close relationship with my mum that I know I never would have had my parents have been together. So I do think there's a lot of positive stuff about separation, but yeah, a lot of what I'll be discussing are where it can go wrong. All right, so the first thing I just wanted to say, so I'm going to this is going to be like in 3 sections. The first bit is all about you as a parent and what you might need to think about and how to look after yourself. The second is about the kind of struggles we see with children in the therapy room, the kind of issues that kind of tend to come up, and what children say to us about their separated parents. And then the third area we'll talk about is sort of the more managing the family going forward. So, how to handle new partners coming in, or struggles with the child not wanting to go to, not contact, I always say contact, but, to cut, like when it's shared parenting. So things like that. And at the end of each section, I'll pause so that you can ask questions, but feel free to jump in. Okay, so fit your own oxygen mask first is what we say all the time, because basically you are your child's safety. And I really can't emphasize this enough, that, no matter what child, separated or not, comes into our therapy room, we always want to just check that the parent's okay first, because if a parent's not okay, the child will not be okay. So always, if we see a very distressed parent, but they're bringing their child because they're like, because of course we all want our child fixed before us, we'll try and dial it back and say, and make sure that parent's got the help or support that they need. And we see this time and time again, that children are just not okay when they pick up that their parent isn't. So, of course, being a single parent, you will have probably been through quite a journey to get to that point. It can be very draining, very stressful, finding lots of, I don't need to tell you all this stuff. But the additional stresses and strains mean that as a parent, you may struggle to manage your emotions. You may be struggling, and that can impact on sort of poor decision making, or we're less empathic when we're more stressed. So yeah, it really, you need to look after yourself. And one of the first things we would say to people before we kind of jump into all of this is, it can be really useful just to think about, like, where is your safe place, even if it's just psychologically in your head. So is there somewhere where you feel welcome, that you belong, you can totally relax? It may have been a beach a few years back, or it may be a bit made up, but it's really useful to just have somewhere in your head. And if you can visit it in reality, great, but just somewhere that you can kind of check out and have a few minutes and just kind of get yourself grounded, take a few breaths, really kind of go through all your 5 senses and check in with that place. So that's kind of safety and regulate and calm yourself. And then on the other side, maybe a time where you were really capable and you felt sort of proud of what you'd achieved, where you were kind of in your element. It might have been at work or some other time, but just have a couple of those examples at the front of your mind, so that you, for those moments when you're feeling really de-skilled or at a loss, and you just need to kind of get yourself back onto steady ground, you just have like a stock of a few places you can go in your head to just kind of get your feet back on the ground and get back into kind of a capable mode. So that's the first point. You are your child's safety always. So look after yourself and fit your own oxygen mask first. And then I just want to talk through a little bit about the kind of the more specific struggles, I guess. So the first thing is, you probably have been through a bit of a trauma to get to the point you are. Like in psychology, we talk about sort of proper PTSD trauma is where you felt your life was at risk, or you witnessed something similar, like where someone's life was at risk. So I don't necessarily mean that kind of trauma. We sometimes talk about smaller traumas. So that can be like bullying, in the workplace or in school, arguments, experience of abuse or violence, and separation. So that they are small traumas. But what we know so I am a EMDR consultant, which is a particular kind of trauma therapy. And when I'm doing that work, yes, the big traumas are important, but those little traumas have a huge impact on people's functioning. So, they can shape how you see yourself. They can change how you feel about yourself, how you view the world. And they can mean that you get quite triggered quite easily. So, an example for a child might be that they, a teacher told them they would be good for nothing, they would achieve nothing. And then every time they go to a job interview or something like that, as an adult, they kind of get that overwhelming sense of, well, I'm good for nothing, I shouldn't be here. So, if you've experienced small traumas in your separation or in your journey to single parenthood, they may well be getting triggered in your day-to-day life. So one way to do it, like if someone's coming into the therapy room, we would just say, in relation to your separation, can you think of like your 3 worst memories? And when you think of those, each of them, then you get quite a clear image of them. Can you just check in as to how disturbing they feel now? So that's how your body reacts now when you think about that. And if it's, you know, if it's kind of on the, you know, sort of 6, 7, 8 or 9 out of 10, so you're getting quite a sort of a body fear or anger or anxiety response, then we would say that that's probably influencing you now in your day-to-day life, and may well be getting triggered by certain comments your child makes or a partner makes or whatever. So it may be worth some attention. And the kind of therapy that we would recommend for that would be something like EMDR, sort of a trauma treatment, but focused in on those incidents. So that's kind of the trauma. And just to say, you will have experienced grief, you know, and grief in a broader sense. So what you have lost in terms of perhaps a partner, or the dream that you may have had as to what your family was going to look like, and perhaps that hasn't played out the way you had hoped, and that can cause grief and shame and guilt, which is the other thing I wanted to mention. You know, and guilt in parenting is such a tricky one. You know, we all feel guilty as parents, of course, but when we feel really guilty and it's not acknowledged, it can be quite destructive. I mean, a good example of this that's perhaps a bit more separate, you know, is where a child has been very ill and in hospital, you know, or had some sort of prolonged illness. We see parents feeling really, really guilty because they can't do anything to make it better. And then they kind of overcompensate and do all sorts of things that can be quite unhelpful. And I think it can be the same depending on what has happened in your journey to single parenting. If you feel guilty, but actually it's too tricky to even acknowledge that, that guilt can then get played out in things we might do to kind of overcompensate, that end up not being useful for our children. So they're just kind of 3 issues: to think about your trauma, to think about the grief, and to think about any guilt that you've got, even if it's too tricky to kind of fully articulate, and just consider how that may be impacting on your day-to-day parenting. And, you know, I would say that a couple of sessions with some sort of a therapist, if you think these issues are getting in the way, would probably go a long way to just being clear on what are your trigger points, what are your kind of sore points, and how does that get acted out as a parent. And just to say, I talk about several other kind of therapeutic approaches in the Discoco's Bounce Back course. So I outline 3 or 4, I think, therapeutic models and how they relate to grief and loss. So there's and a few practical exercises and things, so that's in there. So that's kind of my summary about fit your own oxygen mask first. Look after yourself. You know, your attachment theory tells us that, you know, you absolutely are the most important person for your child. Even if you've got one of those adolescents that pretend you're not, you are. And you must look after yourself, and before you go and try and make everything better for everybody else. So I'll pause just now and just see if there's any particular questions around looking after you and your needs before we move on to children, thinking about what your children may need.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself or pop them in the chat box, and I can read them out. I think a lot of people definitely will resonate with what you're saying, Andrea. It's so difficult. You always forget to put yourself first, don't you? When you're a parent, you forget to look after yourself because you're so focused on looking after the children. Yeah, you feel guilty, don't you? Even if you like, sometimes you think, oh, I've sat down or I've done this, and you just feel absolute guilt that you've done it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you know, and it's what I see in the therapy room that tells me how important it is, because I see children like watching for their parents' reaction. If I ask a question about, oh, how was the separation, or, you know, how are things now with the child's dad or whatever, and, you know, and I see the child very carefully watching for the parent's response, or kind of offering some sort of caregiving, you know, to the parent, that like they are totally tuned in to how you're doing, and they know when you're not okay. But
what we'll do then, we can carry on, and then, but if anyone's got any questions, like, just pop them in. You don't need to wait for the pause. Please feel free to pop them in, and we can answer them as and when.
Cool. All right. So yeah, moving on to the kind of common child struggles or things that we see in the therapy room. And so the first one is kind of what I've just alluded to there, is children worrying about their parents. So, because obviously they're not living with both parents all of the time, and they know that, one or both parents may really be struggling with the separation, or just with living as a single parent and all of the stress that can bring. So that can mean that, a child is worrying a lot more than what a parent may realize about their parents' well-being. And sometimes then that tips into a child becoming quite parentified. So, that they're very closely attuned to watching for their parents' reaction and trying to make life better for their parent. And while on one hand, that can be very sweet and it's very caregiving, often it can be done at the expense of their developmental tasks, really. So they're meant to kind of be focused on their own kind of needs, and they're meant to be a bit selfish and kind of focused on themselves. And so it's just to be careful when they tip it over into becoming very taken up with how their parents are doing. And it wouldn't be unusual for, if I'm maybe working with a child and I'll make a suggestion that maybe you need to do a bit of this, or spend some more time with this person. They say, oh no, I couldn't do that. Like that would, my mum would start to feel I don't want to hang about with her, I don't want to see her so much, there's no way I could do that. So that we see a lot of children very tuned in to their parents. I just saw a question, so I'll pause for that. Go ahead, Dee.
Hello there. Hi. So I have two children, a 14-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl. So my question is, do you find that there's a gender difference when that manifests? In my own situation, it would be my daughter, the youngest of two, that would be very tuned in. Now, right. My son may be quietly, but he doesn't communicate as directly as my daughter.
And very much my own personal experience. So my full sibling was a boy, and it was very much me that took the caregiving role with my mum. So I think it depends on the family setup. What I see in the therapy room, not so much actually. I see some of the girls looking after their parents in different ways. Like I'm thinking of one that goes and cleans the dad's flat at weekends, empties his dishwasher, makes helps him do his shopping, all that sort of stuff. So that kind of, those tend to be sort of the more feminine roles. But no, I also am aware of several boys and teenage boys in therapy that have been very worried about their parents, or base some of their decision thinking around. Yeah, so I think they're probably quietly worried, actually.
So I do recognize that my son would hold a lot of feelings inwards. So what would be a tip to help him open up in relation to that topic, his worries about me, or indeed about the situation? Now, I'm a number of years into it, but I find that it never stops. It's a work in progress,
Oh gosh, yeah, definitely.
The age then has, whatever age the children are at, there are different challenges at each stage.
Oh, for sure. I think tips wise, I would just find whatever method of communication works best for your child. So, we find some children respond much better with text messages because it's less intrusive, less in your face. Others, will appreciate a conversation or a walk, or in the, you often hear about conversations in the car. Like some of the best conversations between parent and children happen in the car on the way to therapy or the way home from therapy. That's where more than half the work is done.
Okay.
So I think it's just, or writing a little letter or a card, or that, it's finding a way in that feels manageable for your child, and sometimes just planting a seed and then revisiting it. So you could say something like, I was just reading something, or I was just thinking about something, and it made me wonder, do you ever worry how I'm doing? Like how much headspace does that take up for you? And I wonder if is there any questions you need to ask me, like what worries you most? Or you can just plant that and then come back and then check in with a text message maybe a few days later and just say, just wanted to make sure that you're okay with that. Or so I could keep it quite light.
Okay, I haven't used the text messages to communicate with him emotionally, so maybe that's a way to do it, because he's never off the phone.
Right. I think there's some, it's a lot less, it's a lot less intimidating. This kids that struggle to talk about their emotions can do it a lot easier by text for many of them. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, and just there's some more questions coming through now. So someone's just saying, so yeah, your child is autistic and they're not good at showing their emotions, and you're worried about how he's really coping because he doesn't talk about it and he's 9. I would say with a child like that, it depends on whether they play, but look out for themes if a child plays, look out for themes in their play, or the stories that they're interested in. We would do a lot with children that really struggle to talk about difficulties. I would use therapeutic stories quite a bit, or I would just make up stories about them, but it's not actually, I'll make it up about something else rather than them. I keep it removed. Or we just talk about abstract themes. But I think if your child's autistic, is really, always with autism, it's just finding again what the best communication strategy is for your child, and how they express themselves, and doing it through that. But I think with all of this, it's giving them permission and naming it. So, that's something we would do in therapy a lot. It's just say, look, this is something I know a lot of young people struggle with, or this is something that's really common when children, when their parents split up. I wonder, is this something that has gone on for you? So as soon as you kind of name these things and say them, and the child sees that you're not devastated by talking about it, you're saying, look, lots of kids struggle after this. I wonder what's been hard for you. Or if you just give them permission, that can just allow so much. And that's, I think, what I meant earlier when I was referring to the guilt. Sometimes our guilt makes it too hard for us to even go there, and the child knows that. They know that it's too difficult to talk about, so a common thing I've seen is maybe the parents will come in with the child and they'll say, they're managing to come in together to kind of talk to me about their child, so that they've managed very well, and they'll say, look, we don't think separation has affected them. We kept it very child focused always, it was always about them. But then I get a very different story when I speak to the child, but they couldn't then let their parents know that it was hurting them in the way that it had, because they were too worried about burdening the parent. So I think when the guilt or our kind of desire for it just to be all okay means we can't allow space to then say, most kids whose parents split up are going to have some sort of hurt or another. I wonder what yours is. That's the huge part. Sorry, I'm rambling now. Let me just read the second question. So I feel like I need to hide my feelings to my children so not to burden them. Is this correct approach, or in their best interest to be open and honest? So with this, I would say, I would say always be honest with your children, because they know they're like little detectives, they absolutely, they can read you better than probably anybody else. So because you are, when we think about attachment theory, what attachment theory is basically, our young are entirely dependent on us for survival. And so they have to do everything to maximize your availability and closeness to you. So we are just children are biologically programmed to be able to read the minute kind of responses or details in their parents to determine, is everything okay? Are they going to be able to feed me, at a biological kind of instinct level? So I would say be honest, but what you don't want is for them to tip into having to care for you. So something like, I'm really upset and I get really sad sometimes, and sometimes I cry, but, or I get really angry and sometimes I find it hard to manage those feelings, but I'm speaking to my sister, or I'm getting some help for that, or these are the things I'm doing to work it out. It's and yes, being with you as my child, brings me so much joy, but it's not your job to make me better, or it's not your job to cheer me up. I have other ways of doing that, so I think it's giving them enough information. Like, it's when we lie to children and say, oh no, I'm fine, or oh no, we're not arguing, or, you know, they don't trust it. They know rightly. So give them enough, but just don't, just be careful about that caregiving rule. Okay, so I'll just carry on with a few other pointers, but feel free to jump in. So yeah, I think just to say, the children, of course, will have their own grief, loss, and sadness and rejection. And, I think pretty much every child that has been through a separation will have experienced some of these feelings. There is a loss of their parents being together, or the loss of a particular parent, and one or both parents may change quite a bit following the separation. And so their parent gets reshaped a little bit. And so there is, no matter what way you look at it, they're losing something. They may have lost a house. They may, these things do matter to children. So it's not to say it shouldn't have happened, but they have experienced a loss, and there will be some sadness, and they may well feel some degree of rejection. And I know most people are quite aware of this, but the number of children that will still tell us they blame themselves in some way. I think just to keep in mind that children, it is their go-to response to blame themselves. And psychologically, in some ways, it's healthy to blame yourself, because it means you feel like you've got some sense of control over the world, or over life. Because of course, psychologically, we know that one of the worst things is what we call learned helplessness, but where you feel you've got no control over anything, and you may as well just kind of put up with it all. That's really not good for psychological functioning. Sorry, the dog just come in. So, children, no matter what, they will blame themselves, and in some way it's serving to protect them, because they're thinking, well, if I can just do this, then it'll be okay. So managing that can be tricky, but helping them to understand that they are very much loved by both parents, and that giving them enough understanding. If one of the parents perhaps is able to parent independently, maybe because of mood issues, or I don't know, whatever reason, giving them enough of an understanding as to what that's about, because otherwise the child's go-to response will be to blame themselves. And actually a bit like Deborah's question earlier, if we don't give children enough of an explanation, something that will make sense, they will just blame themselves. So if you're really sad and you're not really giving some sort of an account to your child as to why you're sad, they'll think you're just sad because you don't want to hang out with them, or something like that. So they do need some sort of explanation that makes sense, so they don't jump to that self-blame. So I think really it's just making space for their sadness, for their loss, and allowing it, if we can, because it's tough to do. If you're going through your own loss, it's really hard to then sit with your child's loss. But if you can make space for it and allow it, that absolutely will be beneficial for them. Okay. And then just to say a bit about fear and anxiety, particularly for the younger children. So we would see a lot of separation anxiety with younger children. And it's really, really hard on kids moving between houses, particularly those younger children that, that have a particular attachment to a particular bed with a particular smell and particular toys and routines. And it can be really, really hard for them moving, particularly if one of those places feels more like home and more like their safe place. And then they have to, to move at an age that is tricky for them to manage that. Of course, teenagers can manage that much better, but those younger children, may well be struggling with that. So, it's just doing as much as possible to keep the homes as similar as possible around how we parent and around routines and there are things that make them feel safe. But so there will be some fears and anxiety, and they may have fears and anxiety about the future. And just like a little reminder is, yes, I was talking to Lucy about this previously. Kids will be, we say kids are very resilient, and I would say rather than resilient, I'd say they're adaptable. They know what they need to do to make a situation workable. And quite often, though, that might mean shoving down their own feelings, and so that they can make something work, because they know that has to be the way. So there's a price to pay when they sometimes with how they adapt. So yeah, I think they will adapt and they'll manage, but make space for the fear, the grief, the loss. Okay, and then
Andrea, sorry to interrupt. Someone's just sent me a direct message, and they've just asked, how do I manage the situation when my son doesn't want to go to his dad's? Should I insist or let him decide?
What age is he? Do you know what age the child is?
14. He's 14.
14. Okay. So I mean, it's so much easier at 14 because the child is fully entitled to make their own choices by that age. I would say, yeah, by the time the child's 14, you let them make their own choices. I wouldn't force them. I would obviously help them to understand that they still need a relationship with their father in some shape or form, and I would be creative as to how they can best do that. So is it, what do they enjoy doing with their dad, and how can that happen? Because you absolutely, if that relationship is worth saving, do. But I don't think you can force a 14-year-old. That's not going to be good. But I mean, it gets so much trickier when the children are younger, of course, and the court has ordered that they must spend a certain amount of time with someone else. I personally feel quite annoyed with the court system at the moment, really, and how heavily it goes towards this 50-50 split, and even where there are clear evidence that a child is frightened or anxious to go to another parent, they're made to, and I think that really annoys me. But well, not more than annoys me, but there are ways, of course, we can help the child with that, to make it as safe and as smooth as possible. But just it's a really big ask to ask those younger kids to do that. But yeah, 14-year-old, it's their own choices. And if that were to go to court, it's absolutely, that child would be able to voice that. I mean, I'd want to explore, why not? Is it just because they want to hang out with their mates? And when I say just hang out with their mates, I don't mean to undermine that, because for a 14-year-old, that's everything. And I think this is another example where the 50-50 split can, it's just, when a child's a teenager and wants to be at that party, of course that's going to matter more than everything else. So if there can be some more flexibility and putting the child at the center and thinking, well, of course, that's what 14-year-olds want to do, but what other ways can we look after your relationship with your dad? So if you can be creative and a bit more flexible around it, that's going to work much better. Cool. And then one other thing to watch out for, I think, particularly when we get to blended families, is a child moving towards independence too quickly. So I think I've read a book recently, which I've really enjoyed, called Hang On to Your Kids, or Hold On to Your Kids, it's called, by Gabor Mate. And it just talks about how sort of the last few generations, we've kind of been pushing our children towards independence, perhaps a little bit too quickly, partly because we've needed to, because we need to work and we don't have family networks around us the way we once did. But that has led to children depending on their peers or relying on them as attachment figures too soon. Well, not too soon, but just they're relying on them as attachment figures, and that's never going to work very well, because their mates will let them down, and their mates will say cruel things at times. Their mates will not provide unconditional love and support always, no matter what they do. So that can lead to a lot of instability for teenagers. And I think with separated families, sometimes there can be even more pressure for that child to become more independent, for financial reasons, or if there's another partner involved, perhaps, there can be several other pulls that mean that child kind of goes towards their peers a bit sooner than is is good. So whatever you can do to just nurture that attachment relationship, and help that child feel understood and heard and needing you is going to be good. So there, that's the kind of main things I would say we see in the therapy room. I mean, there's one child talked to me, I'll mention that next actually. So in a minute, I'll move on then to talking about managing, moving between houses and blended families and stuff. But just if there was any questions there on children and how they cope and their needs. Grand. Okay. All right. So yeah, we've talked a bit about how we manage moving between homes. And there was one girl who told me, she literally just felt bounced around like a ball, and it wasn't just actually for her, it wasn't just her parents, but she was a kind of easygoing child, and so even in school, if they needed someone else in a different group, they just thought they could bounce her between groups. And so but that gave a real sort of clear message to her that she wasn't that important, that she could just be kind of bounced around between these places. So yeah, I think we just need to be really careful as to how we manage that, and keeping it as child-centered as possible. I mean, conflict between parents, of course, that's a tricky one. I think always just be respectful. Of course, 50% of their DNA comes from the other partner, comes from their mum or their dad, and so when we're expressing our dissatisfaction with the other person, or we're managing that conflict, just obviously being careful about that. I talk a bit about this actually in the Bounce Back course. In the Bounce Back course, I have a section on grief and loss, about how you manage that in a separation, but then we have a bit at the end which is more about managing children, and in the context of a separation. And so I kind of give a lot more sort of examples as to how you might talk about these things. But I think where there are issues, particularly with older children, they do need, like I said earlier, some sort of a context. So it is okay to say, I found your dad frightening at times, or your mum can lose her temper very easily, or whatever it is. It's okay to name those things. Otherwise your child is left kind of feeling that they're going a bit crazy, or they're the only one that feels that. But then not, of course, but keeping yourself regulated and in control as you talk about those things, rather than obviously going on a big rant, and keeping things balanced. So, I'm sure you've heard all of this stuff. You don't need a psychologist to tell you all this. And loyalty struggles, I think children do feel massive loyalty struggles, and that's definitely something I experienced a lot of. You kind of want to please the other parent, and sometimes that might mean slagging the other parent off, and then the child is left with like awful guilt. So I think just be aware they need both their parents, and the relationship with both parents is so important. But they also need to manage those relationships. So if there are complexities with either of those parents, they do need some support to understand that and manage that, but in a way that is respectful and helps them to nurture that relationship as best possible. And then, blended families, the last point just to mention, you can have a whole course on that. They can work amazingly, and they can have all sorts of kind of pitfalls and tricky things. But I would say a bit like this kind of main theme of everything is there are likely to be some challenges, and rather than just pretending that because you desperately want this to work, so rather than just telling that story, or that being the only account that's allowed, making space for the fact that someone may be very disappointed, or someone may feel left out. And we do know that children, and I definitely see this in the therapy room, that children feel quite displaced when a new partner comes in, particularly if that child has been very close to the parent throughout the separation or the early years when things were hard, and then another partner comes in. And of course, when a parent falls in love with someone else, like you know, we all know what falling in love is like, and you're not able to give your same focus to other people than to your child will feel that loss. And then they may feel some sort of sense of betrayal as they're kind of pushed back down into a child role. So I think the thing we can see is sometimes a child gets elevated to almost parent status when they're in a single, you know, when they're supporting their parent, and then a partner comes in and they get demoted again, and they're told kind of, you know, be as a child should be, and that can be extremely painful and lead to a lot of loss. So, you know, I think with blended families, just try and be realistic. There will be struggles, and making space for individual relationships and space to talk about the difficulties will go a very long way. So yeah, that's kind of the main things we see. Yeah, I just wanted to give space to answer any other questions you've got.
Someone's just sent me a message and said, how do I navigate it when it's not the child, it's the other parent that doesn't want to see them? So I think, I guess if the dad, say for argument's sake in this scenario, doesn't want to see the child or spend time, but the child wants to see their other parent, have you got any advice for that particular situation? Because I imagine that's incredibly difficult.
Oh gosh, that is absolutely. I mean, I think, first of all, is there any sort of account that you can share with your child that makes sense of why that parent does not want to spend time with that child? You know, so is it, I don't know, is there some mental health struggles, or I don't know, you know, is there anything else that will help make sense of that other than they just don't want to be with their child? And if they can't be with their child, yeah, why? What is so painful about being with their child? So if you're able to give any kind of story that makes sense, then give it, because otherwise it will, of course, the child will jump to, it's because he doesn't love me, doesn't want to be with me. And then actually just making space for loss, almost as if it were a bereavement, you know, like how hard it is when we don't get to see that parent, and how painful it is, and what they miss of them, and could he write letters to the parent that can be kept for if this parent is ever at a different stage. Yeah, and helping to still share some, if there's anything good that can be shared about that parent with the child. You know, I think, you know, I work with this a lot, I suppose, and I work a lot with looked after and adopted children as well. And you know, when a child's been adopted and doesn't have very much information about their family, you know, or when they're in foster care, we, you know, it's they need, it's their identity that's most important, and perhaps needing to that their parent did fight for them or did want them at some point. And so having those stories alive, like, is important. So with an adoptive parent, we would have a book and letters and things that were wrote, and hopefully some ongoing contact to maintain some sense of who that person is. It's really, really hard, but yeah, just don't ignore it, absolutely, and because it's too tricky.
The next comment in the chat kind of follows on, I guess, a similar type of scenario. So someone's put, hi, how would you approach it with a child where one of the parents has completely left? So in our case, the dad has returned overseas and is not coming back. So they've made a definitive decision rather than kind of a not sure decision. The kids are 7 and 2.
Well, I mean, I don't know, I'm going to make an assumption that he's still, the dad still wants to know his children, even though he's not in the same country. If he does, you know, despite how furious you must be that they've moved and, you know, are not going to be available to actively parent their children, if there is some way of preserving a relationship with this parent, I would, you know, providing it's not detrimental to the child's well-being. Then, you know, so whether it's online, letters, cards, that you send regular updates to the dad so that the dad knows enough about the children that he can send an appropriate present or card that, you know, still matches their interests. And, you know, it's hard, and it will involve you having to do a lot more work. But yeah, but if we can preserve some sort of decent relationship and a connection with the dad, that will be, well, I'm assuming it will be better. I don't know. Obviously, there are certainly instances where it's best not to have contact, of course, where that is too harmful or hurtful for the child. But yeah, really tricky.
Amazing, thank you for that. I think that is all the questions we've got for this evening. But no, that's been amazing. Thank you so much. There's been so much really helpful information. I don't know if you want to share a bit about kind of where people can find you, where they can find Discoco, where we can see about the breakup bounce back course.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so just Google Discoco, or I never know how to say it. I should learn how to say it properly. And their bounce back. So this relationship breakup course is called Bounce Back Course. I'm sure they'll put a link or send that round to everyone, because they're giving 25% off that course. And they have loads of other courses. They're brilliant. They have such a fun, fresh approach to things. Yeah, it's great being part of them. And then Pocket Family Psychologist is my more online kind of forum, not forum, but courses. So yeah, we're on Instagram and all the various platforms, but Instagram probably more. So yeah, that's Pocket Family Psychologist. For normal therapy, I have a company called Shortland Psychology, but that would be for like weekly therapy sessions. And there are other things we could do. Like when I was planning this session with Lucy, I had wondered about, there are kind of like group trauma sessions you can do. I mentioned EMDR, and you can sort of do like where we would work through some of each person's distressing memory. You don't talk about it, you do it quite privately, but I would be facilitating something like that. So, there are other options if anyone's interested in pursuing something like that. What else? I run at the moment, the course that we have developed that I'm pretty proud of is Taming Your Lion, and it's a 6-week course for children between sort of 8 and 11 that are struggling with big emotions, so anxiety or anger mainly. And we're turning it, we're developing some activity books to go alongside it, and we're running it in schools actually at the moment, and it's doing so well. It's in schools. We're going to modify it a bit, but the way it stands at the moment is designed for a parent and child to do together. So it's just if you're if you want to find a way to talk to your child about emotions, it might be one way. Cool. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much. Was there another question there? Kids need both parents, but then going between houses. Absolutely. God, I just don't know the answer to this. I kind of think a child needs a home, a single home if possible, and they absolutely need to go on holiday and have, weekend. I don't know the answer to this, really. It's so hard, but I just don't think this 50-50 split is, especially where parents are very rigid about it and don't allow some shift if there's a party or whatever. I think it becomes very point scoring at times between parents rather than what the child needs. I think it's just working with trying to think about what your child's needs are in their community, and is there some way of being more flexible. Like I'm thinking of a friend of mine that they've recently swapped to sort of more prolonged periods at each person's house, because moving midweek meant like kids were forgetting all their stuff for school and they couldn't get any sort of routine going, and it was creating more problems. But I don't know, I think there is no easy answer, but I think that my main theme from today is just keep the conversation alive about it. Don't just kind of bury it and pretend it's not happening. Where you see that a child is struggling moving between the houses, if there's some way of at least acknowledging that goes an awful long way. Even if you can't fix it.
Andrea, I just have one more question if there's time.
Yeah.
So is it a given that teenagers will need therapy or support?
Oh God, no.
It's not a given.
No, definitely not. I personally, like, that was another with Pocket Family Psychologist. We sort of tried to bring, we do offer consultations, so if there's something that people are struggling with, like just having 1 or 2 sessions. So because I'm told not all teenagers need therapy at all. And in fact, I get a bit fed up with TikTok and the way that everything's pathologized now, and they've all got labels and they all need therapy, and not at all. Like I always prefer to work through a parent if I can, or to involve a parent. So sometimes a session or two can be useful if a child is demonstrating other difficulties, like they're self-harming, or they're just not able to talk to that parent, or they're sort of, then of course therapy is a useful avenue. But if they've got a good relationship with you and you just got a hunch that something's going on, find a way to communicate with your child. And sometimes we would support a parent to do that, just a session or two, or just a book can be helpful. But no, definitely not. It's not a given.
Yeah, because I suppose teenagers they're already going through so many changes, in hormonal, and then, finding where they fit. And then I reflect back to the separation and how that's impacting, or is it impacting? And it's always in my mind, to the forefront of my mind, but maybe not that big in relation to the changes that are happening now.
Yeah. And I guess it depends how the separation is impacting now, there may have been the initial loss and what that meant. And so sometimes that's where we see a child may have formed some conclusions about themselves because of that separation. So, that's one issue. And then the other might just be, if it's getting in the way of their social life, or I guess it depends how it's influencing them now. But I think
just to be aware, I suppose, as a parent. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Just keeping it alive and saying, do you ever wish this, or how do you feel about that? It's but absolutely. I wanted to be cautious about that, because I realize I've listed all the areas that can be tricky or can go wrong, but it is by no means like a given that we messed up. Definitely not.
No, I mean, most of the areas you've mentioned are topics that have been navigated, or where we are navigating. So, I mean, things do come up, and I suppose that what you're saying is, if you can deal with it in the family environment, or with the parent and the child, that if that's not working, then pursue another avenue.
Yeah, exactly. If you can't get through, I mean, I think that's where I feel that's where therapy is particularly helpful. If it's outside of the area a parent can cope with, extreme self-harm or something like that just feels too risky. Or B, if the child just will not let you in, they're blocking you, and you can't get an inroad, then yes, sometimes having an independent person. But otherwise, I strongly encourage parents to take the lead.
All right. Thanks so much. It's been really, really informative. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been an absolutely fantastic session. Thank you to everyone for joining us. There's lots of links in the chat, but I will also share them all on the Frollo app. So don't worry if you're panicking and you're thinking, I haven't got them all. I will share all the links to Discoco, to Andrea, to everything, along with the discount code if you're interested in the course. Cool. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your week, and I'll speak to you all soon.
Oh, thank you. Bye, everyone. Take care.